Oh, I can't believe it.
That didn't take away all my weapon upgrades.
I can't believe
That didn't take away all my money.
I can't believe.
we're on a whale.
I can't believe.
It's not roguelike.
You know what I like? Roguelikes. And do you know what I don't like? Games that pretended to be roguelikes. You see, there is this question that I've been pondering for a very long time. And that question is Hades a roguelike? Well, of course not. Hades is a Greek god of the underworld. Why was that even a question, right? But in all seriousness, Hades is a really good hack and slash action game that had some core mechanics that a roguelike would have, mainly the procedurally generated levels and permadeath. But does that make it a roguelike? First of all, we need to establish what is a roguelike. Well, there is no be-all and end-all definition for roguelikes, especially when you factor in the fact that there are actually roguelike and roguelite. Both usually used interchangeably in most situations. However, if we dig deeper into the subject, there exists some distinction between a roguelike and a roguelite. And to understand that, we must first look at a game named Rogue. Rogue, also known as Rogue Exploring the Dungeons of Doom, is a dungeon crawling video game with procedurally generated levels, turn-based gameplay, grid-based movement, and most importantly, permadeath. For those of you who don't know, permadeath means that dying will result in losing all your possessions and upgrades, meaning that you have to start all over again at the very beginning. Basically, roguelikes refer to games that are like Rogue, sharing all of its aforementioned features, whereas roguelites retain most of said mechanics, namely permadeath and procedurally generated levels, while introducing some permanency to the game, such as upgrades that are retained after death. Therefore, we can think of them as a light version of Rogue that are not exactly like Rogue. Now, both roguelikes and roguelites have been popular for quite a long time. However, they never quite reach mainstream popularity within the gaming community, especially when there are games out there that are much more popular and accessible, such as League of Legends, CSGO, Minecraft, Honor of Kings, and Fortnite. Roguelites used to mainly appeal to a smaller group of gamers where the repetitiveness of its permadeath fits their niche. That is, until a certain supergiant came along and changed everything. Hades is an action roguelike developed by Supergiant Games, and it sees the player as Zagreus, son of Hades, hence the game title, trying to escape from his father's domain, the underworld, to reach Mount Olympus. Wait, do I really need to explain what Hades is? The game that sold over 1 million copies and scored 98% positive reviews on Steam. I thought we're here to talk about why Hades is not a roguelike. Alright. I guess the better question would be, is Hades a roguelike? Well, it's not turn-based, and it definitely didn't have grid-based movement. So no, it is definitely not a roguelike, right? Right? Now, that's not a very satisfying answer, was it? Well, then I guess the better question would be, is Hades a roguelite? Now, the answer would surely be yes, right? Well, let's look at Hades at a more fundamental level. Does it have permadeath? Yes. Does it have procedurally generated levels? Yes. Do you lose your acquired currency after death? Yeah, you lose the gold coins after death. That's the chthonic key. You don't lose it because you need it to buy weapons. That's darkness. You use it to buy upgrades from the mirror. Yeah, you don't lose those after death. No, you don't lose those. Okay, we get it. There are a lot of permanent currencies. Yeah, you definitely don't lose those, because you need it to make friends, since you don't have any in real life. Speaking about friends, let's talk about permanency. Typically, roguelites introduce some form of permanent currency. This is usually used for many different purposes, but they generally share one common feature. That is the ability to introduce permanency. What I meant was that these currencies are usually not lost or completely taken away from the players after death, so they can spend it at the hub area on some permanent upgrades, like increasing max health, more armor, more damage, and so on and so on. You get the idea. However, most roguelite choose to have one type of such currency, and every single permanent upgrade is bought using that currency. It makes the player choose between which upgrades to buy. Some games even went as far as to force a player to use up all that special currency, otherwise it will disappear as you start your next run. This is usually done to raise the value of the currency and to make sure that the player plans their purchase properly. However, to someone who's never experienced such mechanic in a roguelite or any game in that matter, it might cause some frustration as they lose everything they earn after the first run, thinking that they can save that shiny coin for an upgrade later on. Hades uses a similar system, where the only thing you lose after death is Charon's Obol, which is a currency strictly tied to each run. You start every run with 0 Obol, then you earn it by defeating enemies or get it from room rewards. You use that to buy stuff that is tied to that specific run, and if you die, you lose the Obol along with the things bought this way, so it's completely contained within each run. However, that is where the similarity ends. Other than the Obol, there are a total of 7 permanent currencies, each with its own uses. And this is why I personally think that although Hades returned one of the most traditional aspects of roguelite, it also strayed and innovated from it, making it less of a roguelite. Apart from the currencies, weapons are another very important part of roguelites, especially when hack and slash is literally in your game description. Typically, roguelites with weapon choices go down one or two routes. 1. You're assigned a random weapon selected from a pool of weapons you have previously unlocked. Dead Cells' starting weapon choices and Rogue Legacy's choose an air system falls in this category. Hades, however, belongs to a second category along with FTL and Wizard of Legend, where you pick the weapon, spaceship model, or arcana that you wish before starting the run. Then you fill in the rest of the empty slots as you progress through the run. The first route is typically chosen when there is a very large pool of weapon or starting item to choose from. The developer probably didn't want to bombard the player with more and more choices as the player slowly unlocks more and more weapons between runs. Other than that, the game also forces the player to get out of their comfort zone, because you don't always get to start the run with your favorite weapon type, and have to adapt to the situation, training players to think on the fly. Some say that this mechanic is very well received among roguelite and roguelite fans because it's relatable. Life doesn't always give you lemonade. Sometimes you get a rotten egg, and you have to adapt to the given situation with what limited resources that you have. The second system, however, introduces a lot less randomness to each run, as you get to pick a majority of the necessary things needed for a certain build, even before you started the run. This design choice mostly served to reduce the occasional frustration that the player could have when RNGesus is not on their side. But some of the more hardcore roguelite fans might feel that this system takes away the challenge that roguelites should have, and made these games stray further away from the roguelites that they were originally inspired by. At a surface level, most roguelites seem to be lacking in the storytelling department, but if we look deeper into some of the most famous roguelites, we can actually see that that's not really the case. Most of them chose to present the story and world building in a more subtle yet interesting way, such as leaving thought-provoking narrative clues in the background, like why is there a giant skeleton in the background? What is the actual purpose of the trial? Who is the spire? Can you even slay the spire? What happens if we pet the spire? Can we eat it? This method of storytelling is known as indirect exposition, and is an especially good method of narrative exposition when the game is more action-heavy, as it allows the player to be more monkey-brained and don't have to actively care about the narrative. This way of presenting the story is less intrusive, while at the same time being able to maintain a sense of cohesion between the character and the world, because being bombarded by the plot while hacking and slashing your way through the dungeon just isn't fun. Most roguelite chose this style of exposition simply because roguelite just generally doesn't vibe well with direct storytelling. Think about it. In roguelites, the player character dies and restarts the dungeon countless times, encountering the same bosses and NPCs multiple times. If they repeated the same line every time you meet them over and over and over again, it would get boring really quickly. Another reason why it wouldn't fit well was that it's kinda hard to make the character that keeps on dying the heroic main character that solves every problem in the world and ultimately saves it. It would be a much more natural narrative flow if our play character is some lonely, unnamed character that just happens to be thrown into this already existing world, and we're only trying to explore more of it without actually making a huge impact on the world. Hades yet again strayed from the norm and presented a long and cohesive storyline to the player through its vibrant cast of characters. Almost all of the game's story was explicitly told to you through very well voice acted scenes. So, is Hades a roguelite? Well, yes, but actually no. In my opinion, Hades possesses most if not all of the required criteria to be considered a roguelite, but they innovated most of them to a level that they have become barely recognizable. So I would say that although I would consider Hades a roguelite, it is the least roguelite of the bunch. But that is also why I really love this game. Now let me explain. Although Hades is not the roguelite with the most roguelite qualities, we cannot deny that in many ways it is better because of that, and Hades' success can be attributed to almost everything we've discussed previously. To be honest, I have no idea as to why the developer chose to introduce so many types of currency and also never take them away from the player, but that does not mean that it's bad just because it strayed away from tradition. In fact, I think that this is one of the few cases where quality over quantity does not really apply. Hades is good because it strayed from tradition, carefully. I don't think that the developers introduced 7 permanent currencies just for the sake of having more currencies. They probably made it so as to add more meaning to each run. How so, you might ask? Well, for example, you have a weapon that you're keen on unlocking, and the game explicitly tells you that you need this much chthonic key to get that bow. So the next time you see a chthonic key come up as a room reward, you would pick that. This gives meaning to the choice you just made. And when you die at the end of the run, maybe because you chose the key over an invitation from Chaos, it feels worthwhile because you achieve your goal. You've now unlocked Coronet. With meaning backing most of our choices, it doesn't matter if the run is not a success. You'll never feel as if a run is a waste of time. Each run sees you setting your own goal, and your choices matter as you work towards that goal. That ultimately results in you finally escaping the underworld 10 or 20 runs later, because you chose to unlock that bow. And here's a bonus point. Besides giving meaning to each run, the developer also made sure that these permanent currencies never completely lose their purpose just because you ran out of things to buy with them. They are given second life later in the game when you get something useful on top of earning them from room rewards. You get extra max health when getting darkness or rerolls when getting the keys. As for the reduced randomness that Hades has compared to the other roguelites, I personally feel that that is what makes me excited to try again after each of my deaths. Now don't get me wrong, the chaotic unpredictability of a roguelike's procedurally generated levels are oftentimes what makes them fun and unique. Every run feels different and fresh, and you never know what to expect before going into each room or level. However, when not done correctly, a game can make the player's death feel unfair and unjustified. There are reasons why card games like Hearthstone and Gwent gain quite a bit of a negative feedback when they introduced randomness into their game, while the Soulsborne series was so well received even if the game repeatedly killed their players. In the aforementioned card games, there exist cards that let you play completely random cards from literally the entire card pool. This introduces a lot of randomness in it, and can easily spawn situations where a losing player gets lucky and gets exactly the card that would allow them to turn the tide. It's fun when it happens to you, but less so for the player on the other end. On the other hand, the Soulsborne series that constantly kills their player was described by fans as being challenging but fair. Yes, of course, you may find some people complaining about its difficulty and being frustrated by the game. Well, I don't consider myself a good Dark Souls player. In fact, I'm a pretty bad one at that. However, I can always trace the reason for each of my deaths back to my own mistakes. and we always think that if I had done it this way, I probably would have succeeded, or at least not die horribly. In other words, the Soulspawn games never intentionally throws an unfair situation at you, is what I'm saying. Hades adopted a similar strategy, keeping its randomness to the minimum and only introducing them out of necessity. Sure, you might say that the room rewards, the boons and the levels are randomly generated as well, but whenever Hades made you choose between a set of random choices, it also introduced some form of predictability to it. For example, although appearing way later in the game, boons and room rewards can be rerolled using the dice, and which Olympian would appear next can be manipulated to a limited extent using keepsakes. Furthermore, the boons that they offer aren't completely random as well. Certain boons that rely on effects from another boon would not appear until the required boon is picked beforehand, meaning that each power-up you pick will always be usable and never meaningless. This is what I would call controlled chaos. And this is exactly why I think that Hades is very well received to long-time roguelite fans, as well as being very welcoming to the new fans. Lastly, Hades' rich story and storytelling system is in my opinion the best quality of the game. It takes Hades beyond being just a good roguelite and pushes it to be a really good game that can easily compete with great games from another genre. While most other roguelites have little to no words spoken throughout the entire game, Hades' script has an impressive 300,000 words and about 2/3 of them are fully voiced. To put it into perspective, the Lord of the Rings series had roughly 500,000 words in total. Alright, while not all the dialogues in the game can be easily triggered or ever will be triggered by the player, what's important is that an average player like you and me will be failing our runs most of the time, and only made our 10th escape and seeing the credits roll some 30 or 40 hours later into the game. But the game's story depth gets increasingly impressive as the dialogues have most likely never been repeated, even beyond the 30th and 40th escapes. This shows the amount of time and love the developers at Supergiant Games took to carefully craft the game's dialogue system. In my opinion, it doesn't matter if Hades is not a roguelite. With all these qualities combined, Hades has ascended from being just a good roguelite to being an excellent game.